Well, I suppose this video could be called What Steve Did on His Summer Vacation, but it's not. How's it going, Minders? How's everybody doing out there? Welcome back to the Mind of Watercolor. Yeah, we did have a really good time on our summer vacation. I mean, my daughter and family invited us along to Hilton Head Island. It's a great beach vacation, beautiful scenery, beautiful nature. Got to spend some time with grandsons, did some fishing. And yeah, that's a gator. He was kind of eyeing some fishermen who were catching stuff on a pier nearby. There's a bunch of them in Hilton Head. But it was also our anniversary weekend, my wife and I. Savannah, Georgia is near to Hilton Head, and we have never been to Savannah. We've always wanted to go. We had a limited amount of time, decided to take this historical trolley overview tour, which is about an hour and a half. And oh man, just a gorgeous, gorgeous city. Beautiful architecture everywhere. Very similar to Charleston, maybe in some ways even more ornate. This house right here is going to actually be the chief subject of this video, but more about that later. After the tour, we had what we thought was going to be a light nacho meal. And you can see it wasn't. But then we did a little bit of a walking tour ourselves along the streets that kind of lined one of the major parks there. And we love historical places, historical architecture. Little tidbits of ornate elements that were on these buildings, just really fascinating everywhere you look. Now, what this got me thinking about was plein air. And I've never been much of an urban sketcher, not because I don't love it or want to be, but just because it's a bit frustrating to me. I have done a lot of plein air, a lot more since I started my channel, but not a lot of urban sketching because of the technical aspect. And when we're walking in spots like this, seeing all these beautiful sights, I really wish that I could set up somewhere and paint, but I just don't feel like I have the style that is quick and accessible. This has been my style over the years of my career. Very, very tight, extremely detailed, technical kind of work. And my architectural rendering has been like this. It's been for commercial purposes, for clients. They demand architectural accuracy and details. So if I've done any of it, it's been like this. And that's really not very accessible or practical when you're doing plein air. You can do it, I suppose. Here's some of the plein air work that I have done. It's not that I'm really unhappy with it. It's just that I tend to fall into that tight, got to get it right aspect, and I fight that, and it is not comfortable. I tend to just work, however I feel like working, line and wash, straight up watercolor, whatever, and I just let my natural style come out. But it's a little bit of a strain not to keep from delving into too much detail. I'm not really unhappy with any of these. It's just a matter of I want to create a style that's a little more quick, easy to do, and push it beyond these examples that I'm showing you now, which again, I'm not terribly unhappy with. It's just they're off-putting for me personally when I'm on location. So, what am I to do? Where do I go from here? Well, for me, it's finding artists that I admire that have work with the loose, quicker qualities that I'd like to kind of push into my own work. And I started finding those. I've actually been doing this for a few years now. I want to get more into urban sketching. I like this particularly, sketching architectural details, but I like sketching sections of buildings like this also. And I just want a quicker, more fluid, more expressive style when it comes to urban sketching before I do or think about doing a lot more of it. What I'm looking at when I look at these examples are the way they handle the details, not so much the construction of the building overall, but how they only render enough to impress or suggest the details. And that's exceedingly easy to see, but exceedingly hard to emulate. So anyway, that was the goal of this video, to go on a searching process to kind of lean into those styles a little more. I'm working in my Hanamulla toned gray watercolor sketchbook. Not a cotton sketchbook, but it's a pretty nice sketchbook. It's going to be line and wash, very simple washes. So if you have non-cotton paper, that kind of painting works great. This is the house that I mentioned before. And if you're at all familiar with Savannah, or if you've seen the movie or read the book, Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil, this house was featured in that. This was a scene of a famous murder trial. Well, not a scene of the trial, but famous murder happened here. And it was a big trial. This is called the Mercer Williams house. But I really don't know anything about the book or the movie. Not much interest. It's a very historical building. It's very ornate, very good example of late 19th century architecture, Old South architecture. This was built in 1860, and I just loved it. One of the prettiest houses we saw that day. So that was my subject, and it was a good challenge because of all the little ornate elements. So what I like to do when I'm working specifically on expressiveness and becoming a little looser, but suggesting a lot of detail, is I like to start off with a lot of detail and work in sort of a reductionist fashion. I picked a pretty straight on perspective because that was easier. I didn't want to have to worry a lot about that. I decided not to do the entire building, similar to what you saw in some of those examples of other artists. And I picked a building where a lot of the little ornate details would not be practical to render, except in a very quick, suggestive, and expressive way. So pushing myself in that direction, but I'm trying to get in a good bit of detail with the pencil. I'm pretty satisfied with the amount of detail I have now. I'm going to go to my Indigraph India ink fountain pen. Love this pen. One of the only fountain pens I know of where you can fill it with India ink. I've talked about it in other videos. And I'm just going to start inking this in. Now, the reductionist approach that I talked about is as we get to final inking and final painting stages, we put in less of that detail that we drew. And one of the ways I go about this, and I've always done this, even with more tightly rendered styles commercially, is I start with sort of dots and dashes. And I dot joining areas, little nexus points. And right here you can see the background's going to make an edge, so I don't need to draw in that whole line. So I drew the starts of it. I did a lot of squinting at the photo just to see where the dark points were and the ornate details, what stood out the most, and then sort of had to make conscious decisions about leaving things out, and that's really important. I got kind of scribbly with the details. This is something that those other artists are very good at. So I consciously tried to not draw distinct controlled lines. And given my background, again, that's difficult because I've been so trained over the years to make very controlled, distinct lines and outlines and shapes. So, but I really want to be able to do this kind of work on location. I'm doing it from a photo in my studio, but you know what they say. Every journey begins with a single step or something to that effect. But as I got into this, I really felt like a style or an approach, a process. The style just really incorporates a process. Was starting to reveal itself. And a lot of it, if I can describe the process, was just dots and dashes. Very limited, drew very few outlines. Mostly just short segments of lines dots and dashes, little scribbles of deep values where a little shadow might be in an ornate detail. You know, even along those bush edges, it was pieces of line, just suggestions of line. And you really, I found, need to put in less to begin with. You can always go back once you add the color. And you have to always be thinking, at least I felt like I needed to think, what's the color going to define? What are the washes going to define? And I started to get carried away in some areas as, oh, I can color this in, I can black this in. And that might have been fine, but I thought, no, I'm going to wait and let the paint do that. And I'm just going to suggest some of these lines and details. Those little palm trees that were in front of the house, you can see it's just, it's not really sketchy lines so much as it is pieces of line and dots. I don't know how else to describe it. But I really felt like it was working. It was a style and an approach that was working. So that being the line drawing, I decided to start in with my washes. And this is another area. It's just, I had to resist the urge to color, you know, fill in every square inch with color. If you look at some of those other examples I showed, they are masters at just throwing a wash over a section and your eye sort of fills in the rest. So I don't know if I was very successful there. I ended up fully coloring some of this. It was a very red brick, and I didn't like that. It was a little too garish for a painting, I felt. So, but little bits of value here you can see me adding, and all of this is really the lightest values, maybe down into the light middle tones. And then there in that foliage, I'm coming back and adding some shadows. But I'm chanting almost mentally to myself, keep it simple, Steve, keep it simple. Don't overdo the coloring. Abbreviated washes. Don't fill everything in. Well, some places you had to, like those whatever you call those archways above the windows were very dark. So this is actually a highlight gray, and then I'll come back and stick in those little shadows. The windows. You look back at those examples I showed, and man, the windows. It's just amazing to me how they get away with just this like streak, a little streak. Well, the reason is because your eye fills in the rest, but they're in perspective. They're positioned where they should be. And it's amazing. It's amazing what that kind of suggestion can do and what your eye can do to take it further. So, yeah, I'm very happy with how this was going. And I've got more work to do. I have a little section over to the side. I actually thought I would do more of a close-up architectural detail when I started this and ended up not. But in that little gray area to the right, or maybe on the opposite side of the page, I will do a close-up of something, maybe. I'll probably do that for patrons. So look for that coming, patrons on Patreon. We're going to take the same sort of loose approach style and zero in on an architectural detail somewhere. Make a spread out of it. I like doing that. And here you can see I'm just going back now with the pen and saying, yeah, I can use a little bit more here. And the paint is telling me where that's appropriate. Just strengthening up some of those details, mostly in shadow areas. Final little adjustments with paint and pops of contrast. I really felt like this was a push in the right direction. So I'm happy. And what I hope you glean from this is a good way to lean into new styles or new approaches. Thanks everybody for watching. I really appreciate it. Thank you patrons for support of this channel. We'll see everybody in the next video. Bye-bye.